David Luke is the co-founder of Breaking Convention, which is a biannual psychedelic science and policy conference that started in 2013, and just had its second edition, bringing a very much needed sense of medicinal and psychedelic activism to the United Kingdom, which is not known for such things. And he's gotten together with a couple of researchers. He's also kind of an expert on plant medicines and a really fascinating speaker. He's going to be talking with the spirits today.
Well, hey, thank you very much. All right, we're back in business. Okay, just quick test. Everybody hear me? Put your hands up if you can't hear me. Okay, so you can hear me, but that's a good start. So yeah, I'm David Luke. That's what I'm going to be talking about, talking with the spirits. I'd like to start off with a bit of an homage to Robert Anton Wilson. Does anyone know Robert Anton Wilson? He's not here, is he? Yes. So, in spirit at least. So we'll be talking with him. And like all good teenagers a few decades ago, I was pretty fucked up and I wanted to know why. So I studied psychology, and here I am a couple of decades later. I'm still fucked up, but now I know why. So I'm a psychologist by training. I work at the University of Greenwich, got an academic post there, and as Charles said, for the last couple of years we've been putting on a psychedelic conference. We had one there last year called Breaking Convention. If anybody here went? No? You should go. Oh, there's one. Good man. Showing the faith, good. And we had about 700 delegates and about 140 speakers and performers. It's a little bit like a festival, a little bit fusing festival vibe with academia, lots of researchers working on the kind of renaissance in psychedelic research, which is happening and getting started now in the UK. And this is a really important place to do it as well, because we're really inside the heart of the system here. You know, this is Greenwich, you may know, is the center of time, apparently, you know, arbitrary time. So that's where it all began. And this is also the home of empire, where Queen Elizabeth had the great idea of building a massive fleet and trying to conquer the world. So it's also opposite the banking district. So there's a lot of kind of good reasons to kind of take psychedelics right back to the center of it all. And we had a beautiful healing ceremony there with a Huichol shaman who did some healing, a necessary healing on the land. So the things I'm interested in are what I call psychology of exceptional human experience. I teach a course on that. So that fuses my interest in psychedelics and what we call parapsychology. I trained in parapsychology. I was a president of the Parapsychological Association for some time. I don't know if you know what parapsychology is. It looks at this kind of weird thing we call psi, which is an umbrella term for ESP, extrasensory perception, psychokinesis. Extrasensory perception is telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, seeing into the future. But you also cover a whole lot of other things as well, like possession, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, mystical experience, religious experience, and mediumship, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. Mediumship is talking to the dead. So this is really boundaryless worlds here. We're kind of going beyond boundaries to the other worlds. So thanks to Charles for inviting me a bit last minute. It kind of loosely fits in with this scheme of things. And the reason I got asked is because I've just put together this book called Talking with the Spirits, Ethnographies from Between the Worlds. Me and a friend, Jack Hunter. And it's a kind of survey of mediumship, of spirit possession from around the world, from loads of different countries. Kenya, Cuba, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Canada, the States, the UK, and Brazil, of course, where we get a lot of spirit mediumship. I'm going to get you to use your imagination here. I'll show you a copy of the book. Here it is. I haven't got one with me, so don't all rush up and ask me for one. You can get it on Amazon, though, of course. Probably not in the Amazon, though. It's probably the last place you'll find it. But what you do find in the Amazon is stuff called ayahuasca. Has anybody heard of that? Yes. Has anybody tried ayahuasca? Is anyone taking it? Okay. A few. So some of you will know. I imagine the rest of you might be aware of what it is. It's a decoction used in the jungle primarily, originally, but it's now kind of spread elsewhere. It's a highly psychedelic juice, which they use for shamanic purposes. But it's also seeped a little bit out of the jungle itself. And in Brazil, where I did my research, there are syncretic Christian churches which have taken this shamanic idea of using ayahuasca, the psychedelic brew, and incorporated it into their Christian rituals where they sing hymns, except for the sacrament is an extremely strong psychedelic beverage. Sounds a bit like Boom in a way. So this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about my chapter in this book where I did my research in Brazil. I was looking into the use of ayahuasca there, and I came across a guy who had been using ayahuasca for a long time, but he was also using elements of possession, spirit possession, where he was getting possessed by his spirit guide under the influence of ayahuasca. So he's told me about this thing where they fuse this Afro-Brazilian transpossession cult practices. This is called Umbanda, where you spin around a little bit to the sound of drums and you get incorporated, what they call incorporation. You actually, literally, your body gets taken over by spirits. And there's now a new branch of Umbanda and Santo Daime, which has sprung up, which has fused the two together, which is called Umbandeme. So it's both psychedelics and spirit possession combined together. Who here, put your hands up, you've taken ayahuasca? Have you ever been possessed on ayahuasca? No? Oh, okay, we got one. Good, okay. Just to show it can happen. Having tried ayahuasca, would you like to try spirit possession as well at the same time? Seems like a bit, wow, good, a few volunteers. We'll do that workshop afterwards. Seems like a bit of a crazy idea, perhaps. But it struck me as something extraordinary. We have a lot of cults doing spirit possession, talking with the dead. And we have lots of different cults and shamanic practices using psychedelics. But it's really rare we find they ever bring the two together. So why is this? So it surprised me. We have this new cult of Umbandeme. So I'm going to talk a little bit, well, what is mediumship? What do we mean by mediumship? This is Thayam in India, and they get into these possessed states where they dressed up really nicely and walk on coals and talk to people, communicating directly with the spirits. So just a definition of mediumship, it could be an experience in which an individual, the medium, claims to be in communication with or under the control of the mind of a deceased person, a dead person, or other non-material beings. And in our cross-cultural survey from around the world, we found that there's lots of different functions of mediumship. It could be spiritual guidance for people, to help people who've just lost people, people have died, for bereavement counseling. It's for paranormal insights, to gain information they couldn't ordinarily access, life coaching, fortune telling. It's a healing activity as well. In some cults, it's also a religious practice. And it's also a bit of a performance spectacle. I showed you the picture of the guy who's got a strip light, a kind of neon light going through his face. This is an ancient practice, these warrior mediums from Singapore. They normally stick swords through their face, but it's got a bit more modernized, and now they stick strip lights through their face and turn them on, which is quite handy in the disco. So this is Umbanda again, spirit mediumship. And there's lots of different features of mediumship. There's a depth of altered state of consciousness. Some people can be in a very light trance, whereby they'll just be hearing voices or getting impressions, but they'll be very much aware of what they're doing in the room. They still have full contact with their own ego identity, their own personality, and they'll tell you what the spirit's communicating to them. And then at the other end of the scale, we have these very deep trances where people have complete amnesia, they don't remember anything. They have anesthesia as well. They can stick swords through their face or walk on hot coals. There may be a change in their mannerisms. They may take on the personality of the spirit they're being possessed by. And in some cases, there may even be a seizure, like an epileptic seizure. But we see a lot of overlap with this, with shamanism. So we'll just take a little moment to define what shamanism is. Incidentally, this is my friend Don Santos, is a Huichol Maracami from an indigenous group in Mexico who've been using peyote for about at least the last 5,000 years in a continuous tradition. They were never kind of infiltrated by the Spanish, and they've kept their traditions alive, and they're still going. And here's a guy who did the ceremony for us at Breaking Convention in London. So shamanism is a group of techniques by which practitioners deliberately alter or heighten their conscious awareness to enter the so-called spirit world, accessing material that they use to help and to heal members of the social group that have acknowledged their shamanic status. So it's one thing to go into an altered state, but you have to be recognized by your community. And when you go into that altered state, you communicate with the spirits and gain crucial and information about how to heal and communicate with the spirits. There's various roles of the shaman. There could be healers, mediators, seers, psychopomps, i.e. communicating between us and the afterlife, the storytellers, they're poets, they're artists, they're musicians, they're dancers, spiritual gatekeepers, caretakers of nature, healers of the world. I mean, that's quite a big job. And also, they act as mediums. But you see that they're not just mediums. They may be mediums, but they may be more than that. So the shamanic path initiations are common. There's usually a way in which the person becomes a shaman. They may be called in some way. They may have to perform various ordeals. They may recover from an illness which brings them very close to death. The idea of the wounded healer. They often have extremely prolonged training, diets, maybe eating nothing but plantains and dried fish for a couple of years. Or in the case of the Kogi Indians, you may spend the first 18 years of your life in a cave and never see daylight. That's pretty full on. I'm sure social services would have something to say about that. They may learn songs, they may learn herbalism. But the altered state of consciousness is the kind of defining feature. All shamans go into an altered state of consciousness. And that may be through various techniques like the 5 Ds, so drumming, diet, dancing, dreaming. What's the last one? Drugs, that's it, drugs. Or death even, but that's kind of a one-way street. And they do that, they interact with spirits. So I was curious to find out, well, how many of these shamanic groups that are practicing make use of mediumship, make use of spirit possession, and make use of psychedelics, because it doesn't seem to be a very common feature as far as I'm aware. Luckily, there was a survey done in the 80s, two guys, Peters and Price Williams, and they found that a quarter of shamanic groups use this soul journeying technique, where they'll have a journey to the upper worlds or the lower worlds, perhaps with the use of the drum or the rattle. Quite a large proportion, 40-odd%, use possession, and then some use both as well. Unfortunately, it didn't say anything about the use of psychedelics in that, so I had a little further tweak around with the survey and found that of those 42 different shamanic societies they looked at, only 4 of those used any amount of psychoactive plants. So a lot of shamanism does not use psychoactive plants. In fact, most shamanism doesn't use psychoactive plants, primarily the drum. And of those 2 groups, only 2 of those 4 groups used any kind of spirit possession as well. And they were the Akawai and the Chukchi, who used the Amanita, the red and white spotted mushroom. The Akawai only used tobacco. So if you don't include tobacco, which can be psychedelic, not just smoking cigarettes, but if you take tobacco rustica in large quantities, you will have a psychedelic experience. But if you just consider the Amanita using ones, there's only a tiny % of shamanic groups which use both psychedelics and possession. So I dug around in all the literature, I tried to look into all the different shamanic groups out there, and I found only 2 others which I could think of, which also use possession and psychedelics, and they were the Yanomami, who we see here, blowing yopo up each other's noses, which is a psychoactive bean in Venezuela. And they get possessed by what they call hukura spirits. These are tiny little spirits, and they can have hundreds of them at a time, and they jump into their chest. And then the misongo, who use iboga and possession as well. But curiously, amongst the misongo, I can't say that, they only the female trance initiates are getting possessed. So the people who have a specific role, okay, they're the only ones getting possessed. So when we do see the use of psychedelics and possession, it's in very rare cases. I'm going to show you a slide now, which you won't be able to read. Perhaps neither will I. No, it's impossible. That's good news. Okay, so I'll interpret this for you. This is a kind of, so Winckelmann said all these kind of shamanic groups we see, he did a survey of all these different shamanic groups. He said they have quite different functions, okay? And he broke them down into different types: shamans, shaman healers, and the mediums. And of course, the mediums are the ones using mediumship, but your traditional shamans and shaman healers never use mediumship, or very, very rarely. And the typical of these shamanic groups is they're kind of hunter-gatherers or nomadic kind of groups. They don't have any political hierarchies as such. And they make use of communicating with animals and spirit guides. Importantly, according to Winckelmann, in their use of spirits, they never get possessed. They actually control their spirits. So this is quite important. It's not that they use the psychedelics and they get possessed by these spirits. They're actually controlling the spirits themselves. Whereas in mediumship practices, which we see on the other end of the scale, they tend to get controlled by the spirits themselves. So there's a big distinction here. And according to Winckelmann, he would say these kind of mediums aren't really shamans. People would say they're in a kind of magical religious practitioners, but they're not quite shamans as we know them. And of course, shamans use psychedelics, or at least they do in these groups, but mediums generally don't. So I'm going to take a little word here from the great psychedelic bard. Anyone heard of Terence McKenna? Okay. So whenever you make a Terence McKenna quote, you're duty-bound to try and impersonate him. So I'll do it at this moment. The supreme goal of the shaman is to abandon his body, to rise to hell or descend into heaven. I got that the wrong way around. That's me again, not Terence McKenna speaking. Not to let himself be possessed by his assisting spirits, by demons or the souls of the dead. The shaman's ideal is to master these spirits, not to let himself be occupied by them. That was pretty shonky, sorry about that. So according to the great psychedelic bard, the shamanic job is not to get possessed, okay? The idea is to control your spirits. You keep them here under control. So we have very different roles between mediumship and shamanism. So why is it then we see this new fusion of Santa Daime, ayahuasca use, and umbandemi, this psychedelic spirit possession? So this is kind of started out in Brazil and is now kind of spreading elsewhere as Santa Daime churches spread across the world as well. So it's kind of a new phenomena, really. And we don't really see this in traditional shamanic practice. So why is this? Why has this come into being? One of the reasons we can look at is the history that the original founder of the Suflores branch of the Santa Daime Church previously worked as a medium before he took up ayahuasca, but then he stopped using mediumship. He stopped the kind of direct possession and communication with the dead. We also find in Brazil, anyone here from Brazil? Oh, hi. It's an amazing place. And it's extremely eclectic, you know, it's particularly in its religious outview, you know, it fuses so many different spiritual traditions together. And it has this history of syncretism, of bringing these different traditions into one place. We also think in terms of Winckelmann's notions of the shaman is they are traditionally hunter-gatherers, they're traditionally nomadic, and they don't have much political integration. So you take a shamanic practice and you bring it into the urban environment, you take it to cities, and you'll find that it changes shape. It evolves in the same way in which shamanism has possibly evolved into mediumship in modern Western cultures. So that we find that taking shamanic elements, still utilizing some of those, but also having these mediumistic elements as well. And there's one guy who's an anthropologist. They take this kind of functional approach. They say, well, what is the function of this? You know, anthropologists are brilliant, like most academics. They don't want to really take people's, you know, explanations of what they do at face value. They say, oh, no, that can't possibly be why you're doing it. There must be some other reason why you're doing it. And as an anthropologist and an academic, I'm going to tell you why you're doing it, what you do. So they take this, what they call a functional approach. They look at it functionally. What does it actually do? And Dawson suggests that there is a theatrical, expressive dimension to the possession which meets the demands of the self-assertive and expressive preoccupations of the late modern individual. What does that mean? It means that people like to get into these possessed states just to have a bit of a performance, to show off and just, you know, express themselves in a cathartic way. I don't think I necessarily agree with that, but that's his explanation of it. And in writing the chapter, I kind of forgot about, I tried scrabbling around trying to find examples of psychedelic possession. I couldn't really find any. But then I forgot my dear friend at home in London, John Crow, who's quite a character, and he's under the influence of various psychoactives, including ketamine and LSD. He got into a possession state, and at the same time they were building the new metro line in London, the Underground, and as they were tunneling, they tunneled through this area, an unmarked grave, an unmarked cemetery. It was full of bodies. And all the workers went, oh no, I'm going to have to stop working because they're all terrified. But at the same time, John, under the influence of these psychedelics, channeled the voices of one of this, well, they were dead prostitutes actually. And they came from the medieval times. And in the medieval times in South London, there was a zone in London where prostitution was allowed. And it was run by the bishop. Interesting, of course. But the bishop refused to bury any of the prostitutes on sanctified ground, on holy ground. So they were just dumped in this kind of unmarked cemetery, which seems a little bit unfair. And John, over the course of 3 days, channeled this, under the influence of various psychoactives, channeled the entire play, a book, and various poetry, which he turned into a play and finally put on as a performance in the cathedral, which was great. It had a guy dressed up as Satan with a 3-foot dildo attached to him, which was running around, as the bishop was watching, which is fantastic. Anyway, I digress. So is it that with our growing urbanization, yeah, so, you know, there's more now people living in urban areas than there are rurally. We've got kind of ever-increasing megacities. Is this a kind of eclectic, modernized shamanism of the future, where people incorporate all manner of different techniques? It just becomes like a borrowed practice of everything under the sun. Well, possibly. But why might the psychedelic state and the possessed state be useful to join together? I'm going to give you some science here, okay? So some of the research that's been going on the last couple of years, this is brain imaging. That's a slice of brain up there. They got people in Brazil who were in a kind of possession state. They're kind of called psychography, where they write whilst, without looking. They just write, and they write the voices of the dead. And in some cases, they write whole books by dead authors, which are then sold as books by the authors themselves, causing some interesting court cases over copyright, which does happen. And what they found when they scanned the brains of the experienced psychographers, the ones who just do it in a trance state, that there was like regions of the brain which were decreased in their activity. There's no area of the brain which actually increased, so the brain was turning off, somehow maybe letting in the voices. So there were specific regions which were involved. I'm not going to go into the technical details, but there's a couple of areas here. Curiously, about the same time, there's a paper published a couple of years ago where they, for the first time, they'd done some high-tech brain imaging studies with psychedelics, because as you know, psychedelics have been kind of illegal for 40, 50 years, and the research with them has all been cut off. So they did a brain imaging study in London with psilocybin, active principle of magic mushrooms, and they also found the same thing, that interestingly, there was no area of the brain which was more active. In fact, there was a few regions which were less active. So your brain's actually turning off, which is kind of totally counterintuitive. If you ask any neuroscience, like before this was published, what happens when you give somebody psychedelics, what's happening in their brain, they would say, well, there's lots more activity, it's lots of random firing. But no, we find there's something really specific happens. There's less activity. And in these two particular regions, the anterior cingulate cortex and the precentral gyrus. And this is exactly the same thing we see in these people in these possessed states. All right, not exactly, but very closely. And they know this is the reason why people are having this psychedelic experience, because they found a really strong relationship between the amount of activity in these regions and how intense their trip was. So the less activity in the region of that brain, the stronger was the trip. Okay, so this is counterintuitive stuff. I was in the side, I was lucky enough to be in that experiment. It looks like I'm having a mega perm. Do you remember those old things in the hairdressers? You used to get your hair permed, the hair dryers. It's not that, okay? Otherwise I'd have a nice curly hair. This is an MEG, it's a high-tech brain imaging device, and you can't see me, but I've got a massive shit-eating grin on my face like this. And this is me in a alt state of consciousness after being injected with psilocybin, which came on very quick, I can tell you. Don't know why I showed you that. This is science, anyway, apparently. So what they found is that the psilocybin caused a significant decrease in the positive coupling between these key regions. And this is what Robin Carhart-Harris, the researcher, said. These results strongly imply that the subjective effects of psychedelics are caused by decreased activity and connectivity, enabling a state of unconstrained cognition. So basically, you know, the lights come on. You turn off the brain and the lights come on. Everything happens. This isn't a new idea, though. I mean, we've only just found evidence for this. But this idea has been around for quite a while. The man on the right here is a French philosopher called Henri Bergson. And about 100 years or so ago, he came up with this idea that the brain is a filter. Okay, its main job is not to kind of produce consciousness, it's to stop you having too much consciousness, okay? It just filters out the kind of sea of consciousness that is all around us. So what the brain's job is to just reduce the amount of consciousness you're letting in so you just don't completely blow your mind. Aldous Huxley, as you probably all know, took on this idea, and then he tried mescaline, and he said, hey, this is what's happening. The psychedelics are actually turning off the brain's filter, or turning off what he called the reducing valve of the brain. And he took this quote from the British mystic William James. He said, if the doors of perception were cleansed, man would see everything as it truly is, infinite. So we're actually finding some evidence for that now, which is quite a curious notion. Huxley said that if you turn off the brain's filter, you can have access to everything in consciousness, everything that ever happened, anything that is ever going to happen, access these mystical and psychic states. Oh, that's a picture of psilocybin molecule. In case you didn't know, that's from the psilocybe genus of mushrooms. That's one. We find these have some parallels with this substance I was talking about earlier, ayahuasca. And ayahuasca has a chemical in it very similar to psilocin, or psilocybin, called dimethyltryptamine. Who's heard of DMT? Ah, that's more like it. Fantastic. Anybody here on DMT? No. You're probably in the wrong place if you are. But come and see me afterwards. Okay, great. Anyway, so you find DMT in ayahuasca in this chacruna plant. There it is again. Ayahuasca is a mixture of usually at least two plants. One contains DMT. And DMT is very structurally similar to serotonin. Serotonin is like the kind of fundamental chemical basis of consciousness. It controls all your higher cognitive functions, your mood, your alertness, your awareness. And so that plant's mixed with another one, like the ayahuasca vine, which contains chemicals such as harmaline and harmine, which are monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Okay, if you eat DMT, it does nothing because it gets broken down in your stomach by monoamine oxidase. So you have to mix it with another plant, which has monoamine oxidase inhibitors to allow it to get to your brain. And when the first researchers, about 100 years ago, there's a Colombian chemist first isolated harmine from ayahuasca. He called it telepathine. And the reason he did that is because so many people were having these extraordinary psychic experiences, visions of the dead, quite often. So we called it that. So I did some research on that. I'll tell you about that another time. Looking at people's extrasensory ability on ayahuasca. So you take these two plants, you mix them together, you macerate your ayahuasca vine, you stick it in a big pot and you boil it up. And then you have your psychoactive brew. And it does something similar. It kind of mimics what we think is happening in this small organ in your head called the pineal gland. Now, if you were to take a big kind of blade and chop through my head this way, it'd be pretty gory. I know, yeah, chop through my head this way, straight through the center this way, and then straight through the center that way. Right at the middle, you'd find my pineal gland. It's this little organ. It's like an eye, in a way. And it is like an eye. This is the lizard. This is the tuara lizard. And in this rare and endangered species from New Zealand, they have a pineal gland on the top of their head. This isn't a head growing out of its bottom, by the way. There you go. So you can see it there. It has this pineal gland on top of its head. And it uses it to see, as we do, in fact, because in the tuara, it has a lens and a cornea and a retina still. It's almost like a fully active eye. And in the human beings, the pineal gland doesn't have those anymore, but it does still see light and dark. Okay, so it detects what's going on outside with the light through your eyes. And in the daytime, it makes serotonin, which keeps you active and alert and happy, which you also find is what gets stimulated in a lot of psychedelics. That's why you feel happy and alert. But at nighttime, that serotonin gets converted into lots of other chemicals in your pineal gland, such as melatonin, which makes you sleep, and pineal, which is actually a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. You remember that word? But it's also suspected that serotonin gets converted into DMT as well. You've noticed they're really structurally similar. And it's actually a very simple step. You just need a little enzyme bump, and you can turn your serotonin into DMT in your own pineal gland. So we suspect that ayahuasca mimics the nocturnal chemistry of the pineal gland. Just to summarize again, here you go. So we have in ayahuasca, in the pineal gland, we have pineal, which is a MAO inhibitor, and that's mixed with your own DMT, and allows you to have, well, the melatonin makes you sleep, but it's thought that DMT perhaps is some way causing dreams. So it gives you sleeping dreams. But ayahuasca has also the same kind of chemicals in it. Has a monoamine oxidase inhibitor and DMT. And this one gives you waking dreams, because you don't have to be asleep to have the visions. So that's the theory we're working with anyway. So what kind of experiences do people have with ayahuasca? These are Shuar Indians, so-called Indians, of Ecuador and also Peru. And people use ayahuasca traditionally in shamanic practices for healing, talking to the spirits, as we said. And people may heal through different ways. You drink ayahuasca, you may have just direct inspiration, divine inspiration about what's your problem, what's giving you your malady, what's causing your illness. Other experiences people have is that they communicate with the dead, with spirits of the dead. I did a survey of people who had taken ayahuasca, and of all the different transpersonal experiences, all the kind of weird shit experiences that people have, mediumship, talking with the dead, was like the third most common experience that they had. And if you go back to all those original reports from ethnographers and explorers, the extraordinary stories they all tell is they were in the jungle and they drank ayahuasca with the natives, and then they suddenly had a vision of their dead father, you know, their father who then died. They didn't know they were dead. And sure enough, when they get out of the jungle, they find out, yeah, their father just died. They've got loads of those kinds of stories from, you know, the late 20th century from explorers. Other things that the shamans say and other people on psychedelics is that they're able to see inside their body. They're able to see inside their body or the body of other people. They may see organs. I'm not sure what that is. I guess that's the heart. They may see down at a cellular level. They may see molecules even. There was an anthropologist, Jeremy Narby. He was, you know, a very traditional medical anthropologist, biological anthropologist, very much steeped in this Western material worldview. And he went to the Amazon and he started working with the indigenous people. And he said he kind of felt sorry for them, you know, because they have all these magical beliefs. He says, you know, obviously didn't believe them, but you just kind of just thought, oh, they're nice people, but they have these funny beliefs. And then he drank ayahuasca with them. And it kind of changed his mind. He came to the conclusion that in a lot of their visions, they were seeing DNA. And because in a lot of the experiences they have, they always talk about seeing these intertwined, like double helix serpents, snakes. And he says what they're actually seeing when they see these intertwined snakes like this is DNA. They're actually seeing DNA. And he reckons all shamanic traditions, you look in their artwork, they have these double intertwined snakes everywhere. He says they're all seeing their own DNA. Well, is this possible? Well, not by modern Western scientific understanding, no. I mean, how can you see DNA? It's tiny. And how can you see inside yourself anyway? But it may be possible. This man here, Kari Mullis, he won the Nobel Prize for biochemistry. Here he is, receiving his Nobel Prize from the King of Sweden, I think. And he won his prize, thank you very much, is for discovering this new technique of doing analysis on DNA, whereby it's called PCR. You can take a little strand of DNA and replicate it. And it was hugely important for the Human Genome Project for mapping genomes, and also in forensic genetics for, you know, genetic fingerprinting, good or bad. But he won the Nobel Prize for that. And afterwards he said he did so by taking LSD. And he said he'd take the LSD and he'd fly alongside the DNA molecule. He was able to see what was going on in very fine detail. And this allowed him to get his great breakthrough. It's also said that the discoverer of DNA, Crick and Watson here, who discovered the double helix shape, that Francis Crick, also used LSD, which helped him make his great discovery. I looked into this, and it is known that Crick used to like throwing masked balls with LSD punch. This is well established. But whether he actually had it in 1953, which is a long time ago, when he made this discovery, is open debate. But we like that story anyway, so we'll keep it in there. And we could think of other discoverers as well in biochemistry. Auguste Kekule had a reverie. He just had a kind of dream reverie, and he discovered the shape of the benzene ring. So all these things collectively have got us to where we are now in our understanding of genetics. You know, without Kekule's discovery and Crick's discovery, without Kari Mullis, we wouldn't know what we do now. And all of them were in an altered state of consciousness when they made their discoveries. So Jeremy Narby, going back to this anthropologist then, he went back to the Amazon jungle. He wanted to test his idea. He wasn't happy to just, you know, try and spread his story. And what he did, he took 3 biochemists, molecular biologists, I should say, people working in genetics. And the people had never been to the Amazon, never tried ayahuasca, haven't even heard of ayahuasca. And they all had a problem with their research. They got to a block in their research and he couldn't get any further. So he took them to the jungle and gave them all ayahuasca. And all 3 of them had breakthroughs in their research. 2 of them had complete transformation of their worldview. And And one of them actually said she was flying alongside this strand of DNA you could see was what was going on at a molecular level, enabled her to have this breakthrough in her research. So this is a good corroboration, an experiment of a kind. So I did some survey research. Going back to, you can't see that at all. Is that just me? Have I had a big night or? Yeah, it's not just me. Okay, good. So going back to the idea then of communicating with spirits of the dead, might ayahuasca be useful for that? You can't actually see this, but I did survey people had taken ayahuasca. And the amount of people who said they had experiences of communicating with the dead was about 45%. 40%. People who had clairvoyance experiences, extrasensory perception, where they're getting access to information they couldn't have, was about 45%. And people having death and rebirth experiences was about 40%. So nearly half of the people taking ayahuasca have these kind of mediumistic experiences. Interestingly, I looked at kind of other psychoactive plants, as other psychoactive substances, and people reporting these kinds of experiences as virtually non-existent. Okay, you ask people how many times they've spoke to spirits of the dead on coffee or cocaine or alcohol or Prozac, doesn't really happen. So this is something very specific to ayahuasca and psychedelics in particular. Okay, so going back to DMT, which is one of the active principles in ayahuasca, there's a researcher called Rick Strassman, who you may have heard. Anyone heard of Rick Strassman? Magic, good work. Okay, so he did these experiments in the 90s where he was injecting people with DMT in a hospital, and started logging all the kinds of experiences they had, and they had all manner of peculiar experiences of, cosmic consciousness and out-of-body experiences and alien abduction-like experiences, all that kind of thing. And but he also suggested they are having a lot of near-death experiences, and in fact that's the title of his book, A Doctor's Revolutionary Research into the Biology of Near-Death and Mystical Experiences. So Rick put forward this idea that the DMT gives you a near-death experience, basically. And you may know, does anyone know that what happens when you have a near-death experience? You have this kind of standard kind of experience. You see the light, you leave your body, you see the light, you step into the light, you meet an angel or a deceased loved one, and they go, what are you doing here? It's not your time. Go back and do that again. You pop back into your body. So Rick was saying DMT takes you to those same places. And he said, he speculated that when you die, your brain, your pineal gland releases DMT so that you can transit from this world into the next. And if you tried DMT or ayahuasca, you might be in agreement with him, because it kind of can feel a bit like you're having a death experience. So this is more Alex Gray artwork. This is a painting called Dying, which Rick used for his cover of his book. So some people have looked into this. There's a theologian actually in the States, and he says, well, but how much do DMT experiences overlap with near-death experiences? And he took the classic near-death experiences, and he kind of catalogued the kind of experiences people have, which you cannot read, probably because you all had a big night as well. So things like time distortion, thought acceleration, life review, a sudden understanding, peace, joy, feelings of cosmic unity, light, out-of-body experiences, extrasensory experiences. And then he compared those to people's experiences on DMT, which he said involved things like vivid colors, Taj Mahal, merry-go-round with people in 1890s outfits, clowns, circus imagery, emotional shock. And he basically said, well, no, they're not the same. But that's just on the surface of it. They're just some of the DMT experiences you can have. But you can have all the near-death experiences as well. So I would say that although on DMT you can have a near-death-like experience, near-death experiences aren't like DMT experiences. So there may be an overlap. You can probably have a near-death experience, but they're not exactly the same. This may be good news for you. It may be bad news. But there is an overlap. So one of the things I've been working on with a colleague of mine, we've been looking into the neurochemistry of the pineal gland, and psychedelics, and the chemicals that are involved and in these altered states of consciousness, which give us access to exceptional experience, let's say. I've been working with this woman called Serena Roney-Dougal, who's been writing about DMT and pineal glands since the kind of 80s, and she's a parapsychologist as well. And she came up with a few ideas. She said it had a lot also to do with the Earth's electromagnetic activity, the geomagnetic field, the Earth's geomagnetic field, okay? If you don't know, we're kind of bathed in a kind of a sea of electromagnetic activity. Some of it's produced by the Earth, but a lot of it's determined by what's coming at us from the sun. And it's a very low-powered, but it's a very active field. And it's shown to have effect on the pineal gland. Okay, kids living near overhead power cables will find that they have a reduction in the production of melatonin, which is really important. It's a free radical scavenger. It's really important in your immune system. And these kids develop leukemia. And it's thought because of the disruption of the activity on the pineal gland. We know the pineal gland is super sensitive even to geomagnetic field frequencies, which are tiny, very subtle, but very complex. So we know the pineal gland is sensitive to electromagnetic fields. We also know that in the ancient mystical traditions, if you take kind of yogic traditions, there are correspondences as well. So in the yogic system, you know, the Kundalini system, your third eye, the chakra, your Ajna chakra, is an etheric body, but it's related to your pineal gland. That's the physical counterpart of your third eye chakra. And yes, your pineal gland is an eye. So these ancients have known about this for a long time. We also find this in other traditions as well. So in ancient Egypt, Osiris, the lord of the underworld, had this staff called the thyrsus, and on it you had this central shaft coming up with this pine cone on the top and two snakes going up either side. And it's very symbolically similar to the yogic system, where you have this central column of energy and these two kundalini snakes, and they terminate at your pineal gland. And the pineal gland, incidentally, is called a pineal gland because it's shaped like a pine cone. Okay, so our ancients knew about this. So what we've been working on then is like ways of exploring these relationships, looking at the influence of the sun and the moon on geomagnetic activity, the Earth's magnetic field, how that influences the pineal gland, how things like meditation can also directly affect the pineal gland, and maybe mediumship as well. How then that initiates the production of DMT, perhaps. Is it possible that through meditation we can activate our own DMT in our pineal glands? We think so. It's possible. Why not? And then how that then leads to psychic experiences. So all of this is looking at ways of better ways of building a borderless world between this world and the other world. And some of the things we've been doing is looking at precognitive dreaming in the future, the influence of magnetic fields, and the relationship between ayahuasca and precognition, i.e. looking into the future. But I think I'm probably going to leave it there and just say thanks for listening.
Something that you said made me remember an experience that I kept going through as a child, where I would actually dream of people that had died near me, without seeing it on the news or anything, and would literally, with my left hand, not writing, I write with my right hand, but with my left hand, without even looking, I would channel words or something from the spirits, and then find out later on that it was actually someone that had died, and that it was even the person I saw in my dreams, or even while I was awake would see a vision of them, and just super tripped me out, and I never wanted to talk about it to people, especially when I was young. And so my question around that is, how do you know of any studies or know of any knowledge of children in particular, because I'd never taken any psychedelics or anything at that point, that do tap into that naturally?
Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, I think kids are already in a psychedelic state of a kind. You know, they've come from the source and they're much closer to it, and they have all kinds of these experiences, which, you know, you get socialized out of you. You know, through your culture, through your society, through your family, through your school. You know, you're told not to kind of engage in those things. You're just being weird, maybe a little bit mad, whatever it is, you know. As the kids find ways of blocking that out for self-preservation, you know. These experiences can be really unnerving and disturbing, you know. You're naturally gifted, so, you know, maybe you could now explore that again in a kind of safer and held and accepted way. One of the things we find in cultures where they do encourage these kinds of experiences, like in Sri Lanka or India, in Lebanon, you know, you have a lot of cases of children who remember their past lives. This is a really common phenomenon, but we don't find it anywhere else so much in the world. Well, we do, but we find that the kids, they get told not to engage with it. You know, they're very quickly told, you stop talking about that, really, you know. Well, that would bring it on. I'm a bit of a blunt instrument. I don't normally get those experiences unless I take psychedelics. You know, some people are a lot more sensitive and naturally tuned to that. So, and I think one of the ways of dealing with it and handling it probably are to kind of train in it, you know, to kind of let it come through, but in a held way with other people who know something about mediumship, you know, or transpossession cults, this kind of thing. Happy journeying.
I want to say, you know, take this opportunity here at Boom anyway to say that when I was a kid in the late 70s, I heard, you remember Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds?
Yeah.
Right. What happened during that time was that it brought me out in a fear, an unexplainable fear, which gave me every known phobia under the sun, like as if I had some sort of sinister tryptamine thing going on, which in my adult life I had taken to the psychedelic realm to bring closure to. And, well, I knew when I was younger I was having an experience that no one else had, no one else knew about, I couldn't talk to anyone about. And I managed to come out the other end of that relatively sane, if not a bit fucked up like yourself. You know? But I realised that psychedelics basically are an instrument, so it appears, for us to be able to understand what the hell is going on. It just made the ineffable, you know, brought closure to the ineffable. I thought I'd just throw that in anyway.
That's beautiful to say, thanks. Yeah, I don't really want to add anything to that other than to say, yeah, I think you're right, you know. But there's many paths there. Psychedelics is one. They're not for everybody, but they are a very useful tool for finding out what the fuck's going on and accessing the divine.
So it was about a year ago or something, I made these really strong brownies with weed, actually, and I had like a really, really full-on, like way more, you know, I smoke a lot of weed, but really full-on kind of experience, and I was having like spirit guides talking to me and this kind of thing, and it was actually saying in my mind that if DMT was being released in my brain, and I asked some people about it, and some people said it is actually possible through consuming weed to have a DMT trip. So I was just wondering if you know anything about that, if it is possible, because yeah, it was like really, really intense visuals, seeing into the future and all that kind of stuff that you'd expect from a much more hardcore hallucinogen.
Sounds great. Have you got any more of those brownies? Well, okay, so we don't actually know a great deal about DMT because it's been like a Schedule 1 drug in the US, and you know, it's in the highest category of illegal drugs in most countries in the world, and research into it has obviously been curtailed. So they've only really done research on kind of rats and monkeys and stuff in the last 50 years, which is a bit of a shame, because for one thing, they can't really tell you when they're tripping or what's going on. But there has been a resurgence of interest in research with humans, so we're beginning to understand a little bit about it. We don't know for certain it's actually made in the pineal gland, just put that out there, but we do think it has. Rick Strassman's doing a lot of research on this, and it's shown that it's been made in the pineal glands of various other animals, and we have all the building blocks for it, so it's naturally assumed that it is. This is just assume it is for now, until we have any further information. But Rick Strassman also suggests that it's possible that other chemicals and other activities, you know, the 5Ds, diet, dancing, dreaming, drugs, I forgot one, dancing again, let's just dance more, can also activate, you know, your own DMT, as can near-death experiences. And he also suggests the birth experience and can also induce DMT. So I don't see why not. Either that or it could just be a massive, hit of THC, which may also activate, the same kind of thing. I think these things are just chemical keys, can get you to these places, and there's different pathways to it. But essentially, you're accessing some kind of source consciousness where you kind of transcend space and time. If you've got any more cookies there, let me know.
Yeah,
Oh, hi.
Hi. Till now you explained how to go to it, but my question is how to get rid of it. Because, when you wake up during the night from spirit, it's really annoying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and how to get rid of it.
Yeah, I agree. So that may be a trickier thing. Some people are more sensitive to others. So, the question was this is how we access it, but how do we stop it from happening? And this could be maybe more tricky. I mean, there's cosmic care for one thing, and they can help you out. But I guess, you have to avoid perhaps, psychedelic experiences, or perhaps better still, train yourself, kind of go and work with shamans, go and work with mediums, and find a way of controlling it. But essentially, a kind of simple lifestyle, simple activities. If you're having a spiritual emergence, which you're finding difficult to deal with, you're going to simplify your life. Otherwise, you engage with it, and you take on some training, and you train with shamans, and you learn how to control it in a more positive way, and also then use it. I mean, a lot of things that shamans and mediums talk about is if they don't use these things, they get sick. They have to actually use these gifts they've been given. They're kind of forced on them in a way, so they have to work with them. So I suggest training.
Sort of a quick one. I'd like to promote the DMT Nexus because it's a really good place for stuff like this, and it's really interesting and has helped me a lot through spiritual and mystical experience. www.dmt-nexus.me. But yeah, my question is, someone on the Nexus a while ago, you showed a brain scan with psilocybin influence, but they showed one that somebody had allegedly been under the influence of DMT when it was done, and the brain activity was crazy, like absolutely off the scale, like the whole thing was active, all working all at once. And I'd just like to know if you have any evidence or have seen evidence of that actually being true or not.
Are you Dave?
No.
Oh, okay, I am. No, I thought you might be Dave Nichols. Anyway, I'm not aware of that research. I don't know that there was any brain imaging done with DMT. Not that I'm aware of recently, maybe an old study, but the techniques have changed over the years as well. And it's a very difficult and complex methodology. So, depending on how you do it, you're going to get different results. I mean, the way that they did it at the study in London, so they injected it, and they have very kind of fine-graded brain imaging equipment, which could look at high spatial and temporal resolution, so you can see what's going on as it actually happens. It may be that this is just a kind of snapshot view of the brain at a particular time. But as far as we know, this is the kind of best study we have so far on the activity of psilocybin, at least, in the brain, which is very structurally similar to DMT. But I don't know about this study, but yeah, it's possible. I think there probably is something much more complex going on. This is only going to be part of the picture, but there does seem to be some evidence to suggest that when you turn the brain down or turn it off, you're going to have much more of these kind of cosmic consciousness experiences.
Thanks for the talk. The modern research is pointing to about 90% of serotonin being produced in the gut by the gut microbes. And if there is a causal link between a possible bumping of serotonin to DMT, you wouldn't need to look very far for your source of DMT. But there's also been a suggestion that there's as many neural pathways and connections in the gut as there is in the brain. And so let's imagine it is a cognitive center. Surely when you're taking something like ayahuasca, that the antiparasiticals plus those complex sugars could be doing a mass conversion to the tryptamines or a tryptamine pathway. And so it's a combination, I think, of turning the brain off and turning this brain off. And there's another brain as well. So.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so I think it is much more complex than that. The stomach could well be part of our kind of neural system. It is really. We always look to consciousness in the brain, but I think, you know, consciousness is everywhere. The brain is just part of it. Neuroscientists are obsessed with the brain. They don't really look at what's happening in the gut. But for sure, yeah, a lot of serotonin is made there. Most of the serotonin actually in the brain itself is made in the pineal gland. It's the highest concentrations of serotonin there. So we, you know, naturally neuroscientists look to the brain for the brain activity. But we need to think more broadly than that and look at the whole body. Yeah, definitely. Why not? Thanks for adding that.
Hello, thank you for your talk. One question is like, do you have evidence or studies saying that you can get there through hypnosis without having access to any substance? I would like to hear something about it.
Yeah, I've got some colleagues at Lund University in Sweden, and they're looking at mystical states through hypnosis. If you they have to be hypnotically suggestible, first of all, but if you get them into a deep hypnotic trance without any suggestions, people have these natural mystical-like experiences. They'll have out-of-body experiences, they'll have, you know, all kind of sublime cosmic consciousness, etc. So yeah, hypnotic states can also get you there, but you have to be highly hypnotizable. So not everybody is. Only about 10% of people can get into really deep hypnotic trances, and about 10% of people cannot get into any kind of hypnotic trance at all.
I heard a lot about healing power of psychedelic substances. Also for different psychological problems. But a few days ago I heard that it was dangerous for people suffering from bipolar disorder or different severe mood disorders, like mood swings. And I wanted to hear if there is any evidence on that.
That's a good question. I'm not a psychiatrist, but of what I do know, I mean, it's generally advised if you have a tendency or a proneness for psychotic disorders, perhaps bipolar or schizophrenia, then you probably shouldn't be taking psychedelics. But at the same time, there was a lot of amazing research done in the 1960s where they actually, and it's little known, they were giving psychedelics to psychotics, people with psychosis, and they were having complete recoveries as well. So, yeah. Probably quite precarious, dangerous stuff. I have met a few people who have diagnoses of schizophrenia. They do take psychedelics. They have to be a little bit more careful. And I think you should always be a bit more careful, you know, particularly if you have a proneness for psychosis. But I wouldn't rule it out necessarily as a means of exploring. But I would say explore it very slowly and in good, capable hands. If that is your case. So thank you for that.
David, Luke, everyone, a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.